without further ado, the New Testament structure. So we already did Old Testament structures. Now we are going to take a peek at some of these New Testament literary structures. And just to review a little bit, a literary structure is the way that the author shapes, right? It's the way that the author shapes or organizes their passage. So that's the literary structure. So the first structure we want to look at is what we call a diatribe, a biblical diatribe. This is a rhetorical device. Rhetorical just means speaking. So it's a speaking device where the speaker raises objections, and then it's often from an imaginary critic, and it involves rhetorical questions and strong rebuttals. And you mostly see this with Paul, right? Apostle Paul will kind of argue with himself in a text, and this is what we would call a biblical diatribe. So a very famous example is Romans 6, 1 through 2. What shall we say then? Are we to continue in sin that grace may abound? By no means. How can we who died to sin still live in it? Right? So you can hear the frustration and the sarcasm a little bit and the concern and just the obviousness of his conclusion. So whenever you're teaching through these and you see this, diatribe, this little question and answer issue going on, you want to make sure that you point out a few things. One is just point out the objection being raised, right? So Paul's objection here is, if grace increases when sin increases, like, should we sin the more, right? That grace may abound. That's the objection. And you really want to pause there, because a lot of times, especially with Paul, the objections are a little unintuitive, right? Like, I've personally never asked if we should continue to sin that grace may abound. Like, it's actually pretty rare that I think anyone would actually verbalize that. So whenever you see an objection from Paul, you need to stop and ask yourself, is this something that people actually would ask, like, out loud? And if the answer is no, which it often is, then you need to explain to your listeners why Paul is putting these words in their mouths in the first place. So you need to try to, my suggestion would be to try to illustrate where somebody actually would ask this kind of question. But yeah, you want to show your audience why this is actually a valid question. It's not just like a hypothetical, esoteric, like philosophical question. This is like a literal thing. And just showing, like, hey, we probably don't know anyone who would say, should we continue that grace may abound? But I bet you've heard somebody say, it's okay, God's a forgiving God. Right? Like we've all heard that, or maybe even we've all thought that, right? So show them why it's actually a valid objection. That's a little tip there. And then also, just, I know this seems obvious, but Bible teachers don't do this enough. Even though it's obvious what Paul is doing, tell them what Paul is doing. Be like, he says, by no means. And then literally stop and say, guys, do you hear how upset he is? Do you hear how strong this language is? He's like, this is absolutely crazy. Why in the world would you possibly think like that? Like, sometimes I think in teaching, I mean, by the time you teach, I get it, bro. Like, you've read this passage 100 times. And you're like, I've read the words by no means so many times. But you have to remember, like, this is the first time these people are hearing this. So you almost, I try to think, like, exaggerate the tone here to draw them in, not just to the information of the text, but the experience of the text, right? So whenever you see that rebuttal, really draw it out, show them, look at this argument here. Look at Paul's frustration. He's just shocked that this would even be something that people would possibly consider. And then you want to transition. I usually transition and then say, okay, now look, he's going to give us a piece of reasoning here. And it's a little complex, but there's a contrast, right? How can we who died to sin still live in it? Right? And then usually, like I said, with Paul, these things are complex or they're a little bit complicated. So you want to actually take your time and explain, what does Paul mean by we died to sin, right? Like, people don't walk around saying that. So you're going to want to make sure you pick this apart and really explain, make sure you explain it logically, but more so, I actually feel like women do a really good job explaining logically what's happening in the text. I think sometimes we could do a little bit better of a job of explaining just emotionally what's happening in the text, the frustration, the transition, the pivots that are happening in Paul's mind. So that would be my tip for whenever you're teaching a diatribe. Hey, did you guys know that we have a free Bible study at www.womenteachtheword.com? You don't even have to type in your email, for now, at least. So better go grab it. Fancy would appreciate it.